conversations.
Learning this new technology. Work with me, work with me. Hello, Dr. Tiff. How are you?
I am amazing. Your intro is fire. So I just wanted to say that. I love
Thank
it.
you.
I love it.
I'm working on it. I'm trying to become more tech savvy. So that was step one. I appreciate you being here. For those of you that are joining us, welcome to Strong Conversations. Tell the people a little bit about yourself, Dr. Tiff.
Hi, everyone. I am Dr. Tiffany. I am a licensed psychologist. I call myself a psychologist for the culture because in the work that I do, I center the needs of my community, that being Black folks. I have been a licensed psychologist for over 20 years. My specialties include child adolescent psychology. I'm working with women and sexual violence on the continuum, as well as culturally informed clinical practices.
Well, all right. And this kind of started as an offline conversation
Mhm.
that I felt like we needed to bring to the forefront because people are talking about this, but as always, they're not talking about it in terms of framing it through the lens that sees it for what it is. And by it, I mean the tragedy in Michigan, where Ethan Crumbly, a Michigan high school student, went into a school and was shooting in the school. He killed 4 people and he injured 7. And there was like everybody has an opinion of this, which is honestly kind of why I waited to have the conversation because I wanted to see how things were going to unfold because immediately everybody just kind of jumped on and said, all right, I have an opinion. And then it was think piece after think piece after think piece. And it's like, y'all, this just happened. Some more stuff, as my mama always said, the truth come out in the wash. And so now we're about a month, maybe a month or two in, and the wash is kind of grimy. The wash is kind of grimy. So I wanted to, now that we have more information, I wanted to just talk to a real mental health professional and not someone that's kind of Monday morning quarterback in this situation, but somebody who's actually, trained. I think that sometimes social media and Wikipedia start making people think that they're experts in things that they're just not experts in. And I truly believe that people go to school and study things for a reason and that we should honor that. So, look, that's just my take on the situation. So I want to let's kind of run down exactly what happened for those that may not know any more than what the headline showed. Because the one thing that I want to say as someone who works in schools and works in discipline, not necessarily the mental health aspect, but just the behavioral aspects of this, I feel professionally that there's so many times where a pin should have been put in this situation, even just from a school standpoint. So I did find a really detailed timeline. So I want to kind of go through that. And it starts on November 26th. And the first thing they say is on November 26th is when the father of Ethan Crumbly purchased him a 9mm 6-hour pistol. And one of the big, and he posted it that same day. And his post, Ethan posted it and said, just got my new beauty today. And he said that it was an early Christmas gift because I think he got it like the day after Thanksgiving or something. And one of the things that was poignant about this is that in the state of Michigan, there are guns that people under 18 can own. because they're big on
Hunting.
hunting
Mm-hmm.
and things of that nature. So I believe most of them are rifles and things that are clear, and buckshot and things that are clearly going to be used for sport.
Mm-hmm.
Which is why his father had to purchase this gun for him, because nobody is killing a deer with a 6-hour. It will rip the deer apart.
Mm-hmm.
So that was kind of red flag number one, that his father purchased this gun for him and that he posted it. And at one point he said, if you have questions about the gun, ask me and I'll tell you. And then the very next day, mom posted pictures of them out with the gun, and said, "Mom and Sunday testing out his new Christmas present." So it is very clear and documented that this weapon was purchased for Ethan.
Mm-hmm.
It's not even a situation where we're going back and saying, "Oh, well, he got into the..." No, you all presented this to him. And then 2 days later, on the 29th, is when a teacher observed him searching ammunition on his phone,
Mm-hmm.
and reported it to the school officials.
And I kind of want to stop for those two pieces first. I think the issue becomes that it depends on how we're defining red flag. Because as you know, there are people who are very much about gun advocacy, gun rights advocacy, who would say that they just viewed the law as wrong, that this whole mentality of what is responsible gun ownership, bump the law is wrong. And so in this situation, those two pieces together, people may say, yes, there's many parents who are likely out here buying their children guns they're not supposed to have access to, who may be gun rights folks who said responsible gun ownership is responsible gun ownership, and would say, even though the law said he shouldn't have it, we then add his parents are out there with him practicing it, so they're giving him safe practices. He's looking up ammunition because, hey, that's what you do when you have a gun. I think the pieces that come after that, or the information that was known about how his overall psychological presentation should have then, which you'll get into in a second, should have then went back to those pieces and changed how those pieces were viewed. So I just wanted to kind of say that, like, those may be.
No, I agree, but I will push back just a little. And the only reason I push back a little is because as a parent, ultimately, you believe that you are operating in the best interest of your child,
yes,
regardless of what the law says. So here, the drinking age is 21. If you, as a parent in your home, decide that your child is responsible enough to drink before that, and you make that decision, then that is a decision that you've made as a parent. I think what I take exception to is that I'm now not going to get on social media like, bought my 15-year-old a 40. Like, that's just not.
And again, I'm not saying that it was right. I think there's a difference between, okay, you are making poor parenting decisions based upon that you're choosing to go against what the law is because you view the law as wrong, and connecting it to the behavior that we then ended up seeing. I think that there was, when you go through the timeline next, there's some pieces that at that point should have then taken us back and then looked at it as, right now we're at the first issue is, as a parent, you are choosing to break the law and get your child a weapon that they shouldn't have. There would be many gun rights folks who would insist that the law is wrong about what guns you should be able to have. And if you're a parent, and if a kid could have some gun, he should be able to have all guns as long as you're teaching them gun safety. And so what we have right now is likely those people who would say, this ain't the problem yet, but there is about to be a problem next that then should have had us kind of reevaluating and been able to put that first. If we're looking at the stopping point being the shooting up a school, this next part that you're going into should have been that stop. Many of us who are saying, who have concerns about those same concerns that people have about children drinking alcohol and being responsible and that type of thing, may have those same about guns, would have say this is a concern, but we wouldn't say this was a concern that would have led us to thinking that he was about to harm someone.
That's fair. That's fair. So what happens next? is when he's looking up the ammunition. The school then calls his mom and leaves his mom a voicemail. And in her text message, she gets the voicemail. I don't believe she called the school back. And in her voicemail to Ethan, she stated, "LOL, I'm not mad. You have to learn not to get caught." So this is on November 27th. And then on November 30th, it's still before the shooting, because the shooting, I believe, the shooting took place on November 30th. Mm-hmm. So the morning of November 30th is a teacher found a disturbing note and drawing on Ethan's desk, took a picture of it, and passed along that information to school officials. Mm-hmm. So at 10 a.m., Ethan Crumbly's parents came to Oxford High School to discuss his concerning behavior for Monday and Tuesday. Mm-hmm. And by 12:50, after the parents said, we're not taking him home, we have to go back to work, and they left during that 10 a.m. meeting. So at 12:50, he went into a bathroom with his backpack. And but at 12:51, he walked out of the bathroom with the same 9mm 6 Hour and started shooting his classmates. Mm-hmm. So, and then there's something that happens after that, when the robocalls start going out, mm-hmm. and the parents are starting to be informed of what's happening. There's a text message that goes from Ethan's father to him saying, like, "Ethan, don't do it." But by that time, everything was over with. Mm-hmm. And then his father also called 911 at one point, and said that he was pretty sure the shooter was his son. So that's kind of a quick and dirty timeline. There are some things that came out later, again, which mm-hmm. is why I waited. Mm-hmm. I know that at one point it came out within the last couple of weeks, maybe the last mm-hmm. week or two. The lawsuit was amended to include the dean of students, which it didn't include before. Mm-hmm. And it was amended to include the dean because they found out that Ethan had brought a decapitated bird. Well, not a decapitated bird, the head mm-hmm. of a decapitated bird to school in some liquid. They're only describing it as yellow liquid, assume what you will, and left it in the bathroom. And the dean said, "Well, I did my due diligence, and, I don't believe him to be a threat." So when they amended the lawsuit, they were like, "Well, sir." So, as we've talked in the past, whole ass mental health professional, help me out here. How much did we miss?
I first want to say that, just kind of looking at the situation, not, one of the things that we whole mental health professionals do is make it very clear, if we have not personally engaged in an examination assessment of someone, we're not going to specifically be able to come up with a conclusion about that particular individual. So I wanted to say that. So I'm not going to sit on here and diagnose Ethan or anything like that. We're just kind of looking at the situation and just kind of how we view mental health in general, and some of these areas where concern should have happened.
Right. And that's more my thing. Right. Like I don't even, at this point, the diagnosis doesn't even matter.
Right. So I want to kind of put that out there because, people will,
no.
People who are not mental health professionals will quickly go into explaining and diagnosing someone, but as whole mental health professionals, as you say, we will make it clear we are not doing that. It's not ethical, but we'll look at kind of the situation. And I think the thing is, there's a couple things that need to happen. There's a communication issue. There is also a willingness to put pieces together and then be concerned about seriousness. There's also staying in our individual lanes when we gather information and not making determinations that may be outside of our job description. So, for example, just from these pieces, because again, one of the things that happens in lawsuits and not wanting to be sued himself is that there may be additional things that are coming, but we'll just say this information. When the note, from what I'm hearing, the note very clearly expressed that he was having some concerning thoughts and feelings. Mm-hmm. kudos to the teacher for saying this is concerning and reporting it, because that's what we should do. We stay in our lane. We say, you know what, I'm here to educate this child, this student. And in that choosing to educate the student, if I'm seeing something that appears disconcerting, that appears like we're going into the realm of there are some mental health concerns, I'm going to then report, I'm going to give that information over and say, hey, I'm concerned about this. At that point, my hope would be that we contact hopefully a mental health professional who is in our school. But as we know, we at times are more willing to have police in our schools than we are true mental health professionals, that we would then contact that mental health professional who would then engage in a conversation with that child, and also seek additional support if it's outside their scope of practice, engage with the family, kind of trying to gather this information. The other piece is that seeing the head of a dead animal in a liquid, which, I'm not want to know what the yellow liquid is, that we would also say this is not normative behavior. Let's just be clear. That is not normative behavior for an adolescent. And that we would, again, within our own scope of practice, then say, hey, let me get with someone who is hopefully a mental health professional and say, is this normative? Should we be concerned? And if we are communicating as a multidisciplinary team, we would say there's this concerning letter that seems to be speaking to possible violence and mental health concerns. We're then adding this head of an animal in a yellow liquid. We're then adding the fact that they were looking up ammunition, but we're communicating as a team. And that in this, we're going to then say, we need to truly look at having this child assessed to determine what is going on. And you hope that that is what happens. Sometimes I think that within systems, depending upon what you look like, how serious we take things vary. Going back to even the gun, again, as we know, people will say, well, this is normative. You have this gun, you have your family showing you how to shoot it. Even if we view it as illegal, this is what we do, right to bear arms. But we also, most of us would say, if he was a Black boy who had posted pictures of a weapon, say, come see me if you have questions.
Specifically that type of weapon.
Yes, specifically that type of weapon. I mean, let's just be clear, any type of weapon that a Black boy would have had, but specifically that one, we would automatically assume
regionally, I don't know, because they're a hunting culture. So if he even
even that, we don't believe that Black folks hunt, except for people. And so but specifically that gun, the assumption would be that he was going to use it for some form of violence, because we would say, because how we already seem to frame the identity of Black boys, we wouldn't have assumed he was up to any good with
assume nefarious intent.
Exactly. And that if it would have been on social media and the school would have seen it, there would have been a whole lot of questions. We would have been searching him, no matter what your school is, because there would have been assumptions placed on him. We also know that in that, when he was looking up ammunition in the school, even if they didn't know about the IG stuff, it would have been Black boy looking up ammunition. We already have this frame of reference about violence in Black children, that we would have likely looked at it as more of a threat, that this child was going to do something. So I think even at those early stages, just how we frame children, and I'll call him a child because he is, even though we don't allow Black children to be children.
Yeah.
I work with adolescents. He's still an adolescent. Even at that point, there would have been levels of intervention that would have happened, likely suspension, expulsion.
Well, right. I was going to say, there wouldn't have been levels of intervention. There would have been punitive.
No, I mean, levels of intervention that would have been different than what we did with this child.
Right. And I guess in school terms, and I guess this is where we kind of differ, because in school terms, an intervention is anything that you do that's not a suspension.
Gotcha.
So like if we had called in the social worker, once I suspend you, I haven't done any interventions.
Gotcha.
I've gone to suspension and I have been punitive with you. And that definitely, I agree with you 2,000,000%. That definitely would have happened if we were talking about a Black child. And I don't believe that there would have been any interventions. I believe it would have been straight go home and that's it. So there still would not have been any help offered, but the student would not have been in the building after that.
And I think part of it, when I'm looking at intervention, is that if he would have been looking up ammunition, they would have searched him.
You think?
Be as a Black child, because there would have been this concern that this child was a threat.
They would have searched him after the picture.
Right. No, I'm saying if they hadn't seen the IG picture and the first thing that they saw was him looking up ammunition,
oh, okay,
then the school would have searched him. So to me, that's an intervention.
Yes.
In clinical terms, is that, it would have been like, oh, he's looking up ammunition. It wouldn't have been like, what are you doing? It would have been like, he's looking up ammunition. We need to search him, because again, automatically, there's these biases against Black children. And we know, even in research, they talk about just how Black children are viewed in systems. That's kind of how it trickles into this school to prison pipeline. What interventions, in my clinical terms, we choose to employ when it's Black children. And it usually goes into the more punitive arena, that it wouldn't have been, oh, he's looking up ammunition, let's let his mother know. They might have let his mother know, but it was like, we're searching your child because your child is looking up.
Yep. Absolutely. And I honestly, given everything that happened with that kid, and given it seems like the community kind of knew that there was something going on with him, especially after the bird head thing. So he was on the community, and by community, I mean school community, in terms of the students. He was on their radar. So I will go out on a limb, and of course, this is not a diagnosis or anything, it's just an educated guess. But I will go out on a limb and say there's no way that nobody connected to that school didn't know about that picture. There's no way, because if he's on social media, and we've already had this issue where the community was concerned, because with the bird head, you had parents that were saying, I know you say he's not a threat, but I'm still not convinced, and things of this nature. So people were watching him. People were not necessarily stalking him, but people were definitely kind of keeping an eye on what this dude was doing, because they were already not satisfied with what they felt the school was doing.
And I think one of the things that there's a study by the Jed Foundation that talked about administrators view mental health as a major issue related for high school students. They said that they viewed it as more concerning in terms of those kids they viewed that were physically versus mentally healthy. The issue is, within our school systems, we also do not seem to feel as much that we can as easily insist upon or highly recommend mental health intervention for children as we can do suspension and expulsion. And so it's like parents are saying they're concerned. Again, for a Black child, we likely would have suspended them or expelled them. But even then, no one's sitting here and saying automatically there's something really going on, and that we're not suggesting that mental health interventions have to happen, but it has to happen, because schools don't seem to be as willing to push that as they are to push just suspension or expulsion. And so sometimes it's like, this seems more mental healthy to us, but we can't really push that. We know there's a stigma anyway around mental health services, but we don't feel that that's something we can push. And so we're just going to say, hey, we're not viewing this as much of a concern, because to us, because he's a white boy, we're not viewing this as expulsion worthy. And so that's kind of where we start: suspension, expulsion. And we're saying this is a problem, but we're not necessarily within our schools pushing mental health. We seem to only push mental health in our schools when a crisis happens, and then we bring in counselors to address it after the fact. But usually we are finding that there are points in time where clearly we were seeing stuff like social isolation. We were seeing kids making statements around thoughts of hurting others. I know there's a book by Langman where he talked about school shooters. And just this idea of some of the things that you begin to see. And for the most part, after the fact, people are saying, yes, they recognize there was something off. There was something going on. There were things that these students were displaying that are more in a mental health arena. But let's also be clear. People can daily have mental health issues that do not result in them shooting up schools either. So we don't want to say that that is a excuse, because again, people have mental health issues every day. Kids are traumatized. Kids have social isolation issues. Kids are bullied who are not shooting up schools.
Absolutely. And I think too, and anybody again, and if anybody wants to hop in the comments and correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the things too that I noticed when I was kind of doing the research for this particular episode is that I don't think these suits have ever come this fast, given when there's a tragedy like this. And I think again, I think that that has a lot to do with how much people feel that this could have been prevented.
Absolutely. I think because as more information has been coming out, we know that even when people have said about previous students when they have shot up schools, that there is some level of blame people try to put on the parents about what you raised. But in terms of clear information, like you bought your child this gun versus your child stealing the gun from your gun cabinet, or you knew your child had put a bird head in some liquid and you didn't say, hey, something needs to happen. Your child was looking up ammunition and you just
told him
laughed
don't
it off.
get caught.
Right. That part of it is that piece of it is that the concern has been that the parents seem to play an active role. That seems to be the consensus from people. You played an active role in your child being able to do this and not choosing to stop it. And then also with the school, people saying, hey, there were things that in terms of, and it could be communication, that all the pieces weren't communicating. There were pieces of not insisting that some level of intervention or assessment had to be done by a whole mental health professional, and making those determinations before the child could be there, not insisting that the parents take their kid home until they got this whole mental health assessment. That there are these pieces that people are saying at this point, there were things that the world seems to be feeling could have been done. And that you would have then not been in this place where before, there were things like the kid has stolen the gun. The kid may have been reporting some bullying, but when you're talking to the parents, there's not this whole belief that, there's not this timeline that people are saying where, oh, someone told the school. Usually they're finding out after the fact that it was like, oh, the kids are saying we knew something and we didn't report it. When they started moving into that, if you see something, say something, don't just ignore it. And so they were like, oh, the kids knew, but there weren't this assumption that
there doesn't appear to be any evidence of that here.
Right.
So yeah, I guess that would make sense. And I know one of the other things that I kind of wanted to talk about, but we've already touched on, because the whole thing about this episode was called What If? And we kind of already hit on it, but if there are another couple things that you want to hit, I guess the question becomes, what if Ethan Crumbly was a little black boy? And because everything comes back to equity and access. I know most people don't think it does, and they always think that I'm just beating things over the head, but the reality of that situation is that this is a case study in equity and access, and what treatment of children in schools looks like based on skin color and adultification. So what if?
Okay. What if he was a black boy? He would have been the first incident suspended at a minimum for the birth. If he was a black boy and was looking up ammunition, they would have searched him, because it would have been this automatic thing that on some level you are a threat. And he would have been expelled because they would have likely found a weapon. If he was a black child, a black boy, it wouldn't have been, parents, you can go back to work. Your child can't stay here. And we're likely going to call the police if you leave him. Because we also know that we also seem to be more willing to, as a society, to judge the parenting of Black people and say, you don't care. And this is within community and outside community, that if a Black parent is saying, well, I have to go back to work, I can't take them, we would have been already, our biases would have already been judging the ability for Black people to parent.
Yeah.
And it would have been like, no, your child can't stay here. We're going to call children's services if you leave your child here, because now we're going to start talking about issues of poor parenting.
There's less hesitation to involve Black families in institutions and systems.
Absolutely. I mean, we are overrepresented in child welfare, in part because of a willingness as a society to contact child welfare agencies questioning and our biases coming into play on how we frame what Black parents are doing. What if it was a white girl? It would have likely been this quickness about concerns about mental health. Because it wouldn't have necessarily been normative when we're looking at gender roles about looking up guns and stuff like that, regardless of where you live. The bird and things of that nature, we are more likely when we're talking about specifically white girls, we'll talk about Black girls in a moment, we as a society seem to be more willing to frame things as mental health concerns. And so therefore it likely would have been that they would have been saying, hey, she probably needs some mental health help. Not saying that this boy did not, but that we're more likely to push it with girls and looking at it as a mental health concern. If it was a Black girl, we likely would have still looked at her as a threat.
Absolutely.
But again, adding that gender piece, that some of the behaviors, the looking up ammunition, the head of a bird, those type of things are usually what we look at as outside of norm for based upon gender identification. Because with girls, a lot of times it's this internalizing of mental health issues. So we're looking at it's not stuff that's interrupting the status quo. So it would have likely been a real red flag because it was like when girls oftentimes are experiencing mental health concerns, they're doing stuff that's harming themselves. And that's why we don't pay as much attention to it, because if you're over here depressed and you're quiet and you're harming yourself, it's not impacting the school culture. Versus if you're irritable and you cussing folks out as an expression, because as we know in adolescence, depression can also show up as irritability. And so if you're now cussing everybody out, now it's our problem. We're still, if you were a Black girl, likely to suspend or expel you because we're going to look at it as insubordination, versus a white girl, which we're likely to more say, hey, we're concerned about our mental health. But it would have raised a red flag as a girl in general, because of it's outside of the norm of how we expect you to express concern. But again, even in that situation, would it have been just therapy if it was a white girl and saying you need to get help, versus we're going to suspend her for looking up weapons and leaving stuff in the bathroom because she's a Black girl, but we're also going to say mental health needs to happen, but that mental health may happen through the judicial system because we're still likely to call the police because we're concerned.
I would add to that, more likely a removal from that school environment and placed in an alternative setting, but not necessarily addressing the underlying issue that got us here in the first place. So, because I don't want to take up too much of your time, I want to try to wrap things up. So I guess for me, what I will talk about are the takeaways that I've gotten from this as an educator, and kind of things that we need to look at as a system. And I think the biggest part for me that will stick with me about this is that the weapon was in the room with them when they were having the conversation about whether or not this boy was a threat. He had the weapon in his bag. And had someone just said, hey, let us search your bag, this could have potentially been avoided. Like, I'm not going to say it would have been avoided, because there's I don't have a crystal ball. There's no way to know that, but it would have been avoided in that moment. And then maybe the things that needed to happen could have happened. Now, if they somehow managed to excuse that, then I don't know what to say about that. But I also think that a lot of times school laws aren't really clear on what it is that the school can demand. And because of that, I think that's sometimes the hesitation with schools to say, you have to do X, Y, and Z. Because there are some things, and I don't know what all of them are, but there are some services where if the school says you have to have this, then the school has to pay for it. So I'm not clear on what all of them are, but I know specifically there are some. And so that has kind of made a lot of systems skittish on saying, well, you need to do this, because then now we're gonna literally have to foot the bill. I think that as a system, we need to become more mindful of what those things are.
I think one of the things I would say ironically about that is that we pay for what we value or what we think is going to make whatever culture better. We pay for, in many schools, police officers, security. We call them, resource officers. We're willing to have resource officers. We pay for metal detectors. We pay for kids. We'll pay for them to be held in detention centers, but we won't pay for tutoring. There are things that we very clearly say we will pay for as a society. I am a firm believer that, especially in these current times, especially in these COVID times, as we know that how this is impacting the mental health of students, especially when we're looking at the research that's being done by people like the JED Institute, like the CDC, when they do their youth behavior surveys. We know that our kids have a lot going on. And these kids, the place where they're at most of the time is in school. And yet we don't prioritize mental health services as being something that is readily available to students, that also should be free within the school to make sure that it's accessible to everybody. But instead, a tragedy happens and suddenly we have tons of mental health services in a school to deal with the crisis. Again, mental health, people with mental health issues do not shoot up schools every day. There are kids who are fighting and grappling with mental health issues who are trying to figure it out. And sometimes within our school system, the figuring it out is suspensions and expulsions and calling the police to address those mental health issues. Other times the kids are just grappling, but they're not shooting up the schools. And so we don't want to say that, hey, if you have mental health, that's why kids are shooting up schools. There's so many other things that come into play that impact that happening, and also the ability for it to happen. And I think our school systems need to begin, when they're making decisions, to address these biases. Say, how would doing the what if, like you said, if this child was female, how would we be doing this exact same way of looking at this situation? If this was a Black boy instead of a white boy in front of me, or the vice versa, if this was a white boy instead of a Black boy, how I'm looking at discipline, how I'm looking at intervention, would I be doing the same thing? And if not, then we need to begin to question ourselves.
Exactly.
Because that's also one of the areas where we can begin to intervene if we're specifically looking at that intersection between looking at mental health and intervention and equity as it relates to the use of consequences, punishment within the school system. And we don't do that.
Not at all. And it's funny that you frame it that way, because that's literally the first question when I do my bias and microaggression workshops. It's literally the first question on what I've called the bias and microaggression internal monologue. And that first question on the bias and microaggression internal monologue is, what is it about this person that's making me respond to them in this manner? And if they didn't look like this, if they didn't sound like this, would I still be responding in this manner? And that's kind of one of the ways that you can be reflective and check yourself on whether or not you are engaging in these types of bias, these types of detrimental bias and microaggressions. So, all right, I think we're going to wrap it up here, but I want you to tell the people where they can find you.
Again, I'm Dr. Tiffany. You can find me at Dr. Tiffany on Twitter, on Facebook, and on Instagram, and at MonfordDentConsulting.com.
Awesome. I love how all of your socials link up. I am not that cool. So you can find me at Strong Conversations on Facebook and YouTube, but because Twitter would not let me be great, you can find me at Dr. Carolyn Strong on Twitter. I thank you all so much for engaging in this strong conversation. Until next time, have a good one, y'all.